It's time for Supply Chain Now. Broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. Heard around the world, Supply Chain Now spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. And now, here are your hosts.
Hey, good afternoon. Scott Luton here with you on Supply Chain Now. Welcome back to the show. On today's episode, we're continuing a collaborative series entitled Supply Chain Super Trends. I couldn't wait to get to the super trends part of that. On this series, we've been diving into some of the biggest trends and developments that are impacting global supply chain, of course, in partnership with Sarah Barnes-Humphrey with Let's Talk Supply Chain. This is episode 3 of 4, and it's all about talent. So stay tuned as we look to increase your supply chain leadership IQ. Quick programming note before we get started here today. If you enjoyed today's conversation, of course, be sure to find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. I want to welcome in my esteemed, fearless co-host on today's show, Greg White, serial supply chain tech entrepreneur and trusted advisor. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Scott. I can't claim to be completely fearless, but I really appreciate that. Yeah.
All right, I've got to update my my adjectives.
No, it's okay.
With
Keep
those.
saying it because maybe it will work, and one day I will, in fact, be fearless. Man.
I like that.
One
All
has
right.
to strive forever, right?
Well, you know, we've really enjoyed this series, and we've gotten good feedback from the marketplace. You know, while we've agreed on a lot of the stuff, we've disagreed just enough, hopefully, to make it interesting. But always a genuine conversation with our featured guest here today, Sarah Barnes-Humphrey, founder of Let's Talk Supply Chain and Ships, and of course, the pride of Toronto, Canada. How you doing, Sarah?
I'm doing well, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me back on. I am so excited to jump into Super Trend number 3. I know we just finished our mid-season live, and hopefully we had some folks on there that were, you know, that have been tracking the series and have been joining us for that because it's been a lot of fun.
It has. And, you know, talent, as all three of us know, has been a topic for years, a really challenging topic in the last few years. And then you throw in the pandemic environment and some concerns as companies move into the new normal and some of what that's going to create. I think we've got an interesting and hopefully helpful conversation teed up with you and Greg and myself. So, for starters, I set the table a little bit. So as we all know and aware of, and our listeners surely are aware of and are fighting through it as well, global pandemic in mind, everyone is challenged in one way, shape, or form with COVID-19. So Sarah, first off, what are 1 or 2 general supply chain observations that you believe are most relevant right this second?
Yeah, I know you guys have been having some pretty great conversations. I've been having some pretty great conversations with other supply chainers too. And there's been a couple of things that have come up. One, most recently, I have an upcoming episode with McGregor Partners, and we were talking about the warehouse environment. So, and there's a lot of contact that goes into the warehouse environment, right? The truck driver shows up to pick up the goods. They come into the warehouse. There's a lot of paperwork exchanged. The truck gets loaded, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we were talking about how to minimize the contact in the warehouse. And that's purely come up strategically from the pandemic, right? Before this, we never really thought about it. And they've come up with some technologies to output the paperwork and gather electronic signatures, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yep.
But it also brings up another concept of how we're really just going to have to take a look at every single part of the supply chain and figure out where those touch points are and how we can change those into technology.
Great point. Yeah, and a lot of companies are finding different ways to play in that improvement space. Greg, what else sticks out to you as we're setting the table here? What's 1 or 2 general supply chain observations of kind of where things are that folks need to know about?
Well, 2 things jumped out at me from what Sarah said. One is paper.
Yeah.
And 2 is how much we think about words, or at least I am thinking about words like touch points more than I ever have before. And the literal nature of those touch points. So just a couple of points there. But, one thing that jumps out to me is how many companies have gone into recovery mode, but are also doubling down on preparing for the aftermath or new normal or next normal or whatever we want to call it.
Yeah.
There are so many companies that are taking advantage of this time to improve their technology systems, to undertake or advance their digital transformation. And I'll define digital transformation as taking what was manual spreadsheets or on paper and doing that with technology. In fact, I was reading an article last night about by GetApp, which is an app evaluation marketplace. And what they said is 46% of SMBs are deferring or cutting tech spending, small to medium businesses.
Really?
But most of that is deferring. So at the same time, 32% of them said all of this seismic societal disruption will have no impact on their plans, and only 18% of small, medium businesses will reduce their spend. Now get this, PwC did a PricewaterhouseCoopers, right, did a analysis, and they said 25% of enterprises intend to reduce spend. So, and you both know that I am a big advocate of taking advantage of this time. And I've said this repeatedly. I'm going to keep saying this because I know everyone doesn't listen to every single episode, except possibly for Jonathan Townsley and Devin Riddle. Oh, and Steve Keaveney. So except for you three, I want to say this again. If you built your house on sand and you survive this catastrophe, do not be foolish enough to build it on sand again, which is manual processes, paper, and spreadsheets. Build it on stone. Use this time to convert to technology and position yourself to preempt and respond rapidly when the next disruption comes around.
There is an old church hymn that sage advice reminds me of, and Malcolm's going to have to track it down because I cannot put my mind on it just yet, but you got to have solid foundation. Got to have a solid foundation, especially during the upheaval of these uncertain times here. So I want to piggyback on some of what Sarah has said, some of what Greg has said, and Greg, I love your data points. I pride myself on my data points, but today is going to be an outlier for me because it's going to be a lot more subjective gathering of anecdotes as I was preparing for today's talent conversation. So 3 quick things. First off, when I look at the current environment, we've heard from a lot of folks of how complex it is of managing the workforce, especially with physical distancing of essential plants, and the challenge that is checking in on your remote workers without making them feel like you're micromanaging, right?
Yeah.
And as I've heard one HR leader put it in HR Dive, which I stumbled across in recent weeks, don't hoard information. I love that, right? So that's point number 1. Point 2, I checked in with Lynette Matthews and Jessica Clayton over at Talent Stream earlier today, leading recruiting firm for supply chain talent. They tell me that it seems like supply chain leaders are already sharing concern about how to tackle the bump in talent demand once we break into that new normal that we all know is going to be different. The aftermath, as Gartner is referring to it, as also from the folks in the talent trenches, they're expecting to see a lot more demand in a couple of key areas: data analysis, as you might imagine, and also quality and safety. So think about product handling in a variety of sectors, to touch points that you both are speaking to, food production in particular, and food delivery. And then finally, up more on the uplifting side, and Greg, you and I have chatted about this with a variety of recent guests. There undoubtedly will be innovation that's born out of the pandemic, and it'll make future natural disasters, it'll allow the industry, global supply chain industry, be able to mitigate those and manage those better. You know, we've seen General Motors, Granddaddy Mim's Distillery, all points in between, jumping into fight and figuring out how to pivot to find new ways of making new products or offering new services or doing things they've never done. And I got to tell you, some of that is undoubtedly bound to stick and create new opportunities for these companies and others in the new normal.
Well, and I think I just want to jump in here because you guys have touched on a few of the questions that I wanted to bring to the table today, and I'm sure we're going to get to in the conversation. But one of them is the reshuffling of talent.
Yeah.
How companies are going to take the workers back in the aftermath. What will they look for? And what is their hiring strategy, which I know we're going to be talking about. Also, will we lose positions to tech implementation? I know you're talking about people driving forward on their tech strategies. So what is that going to look like? And are they going to continue to work leaner, right? Because they're looking at the gaps that are happening right now. They've furloughed or let go of employees. They can see where they absolutely need the talent and where they don't potentially need the talent. And so it comes up with a lot of different questions of what that's going to look like.
Great point.
I'm making notes here because I want to come back to that. That's a really good point. Yeah, I think that's an interesting observation, and we will talk about that, and that'll be interesting to see, what company strategies are.
All right, so we are shifting over to talking more specific.
I'm shifting over. So let's shift over. What do you say? We shift over. And let's talk about talent. The changes were already occurring even before COVID-19. And as you sort of alluded to, by the way, and tried to give me a great segue for, Sarah, and I recognize that now. Sorry, I'm here, but I was taking notes, I promise. But, the marketplace was shifting, right? And one of the things that we haven't talked about in all of this since COVID-19 is how the marketplace had shifted to where there was a talent gap. We talked about this some months ago, but we haven't in a while. The talent gap in trades, welders and forklift drivers and truck drivers and various and sundry other roles that are skilled trades, right? Mike Rowe, the Dirty Jobs guy, he talks about that all the time and has a very specific initiative called Profoundly Disconnected, where he talks about how disconnected education and whatnot is to that. So you aside from all of the other things, that is sort of was looming over the workforce even before all this happened. So let's talk about what you were alluding to, Sarah, with how companies are perceiving this and how they're approaching this. I've sat in on a few board meetings and we've had some talks about these kind of things. I mean, let's talk about what you're seeing in this area around assessing personnel, getting people back, and how the workforce might shift on the backside of this.
Well, and I think you bring up a really good point before we get into that is, we've seen a shortage of talent on the warehouse and distribution side as e-commerce has grown. So it'll be interesting to see where that balances out and what gaps are going to need to be filled from that standpoint. But I think the bigger picture here is how are we going to change our hiring processes? And, that's something that we really wanted to talk about today. And prior to COVID-19, I had a lot of great discussions with companies who have already kind of done it, and they're approaching talent from a holistic perspective. So not only taking a look at them in the role that they currently have, but they're taking a look at what they are good at and what they enjoy doing from a personal perspective as well as a professional perspective. And how can we utilize those talents and really make the most out of a position for somebody rather than the other way around? How can the company make the most out of the talent? And I think that it's really, really important as we move into the aftermath of COVID, we start taking a look at the talent that's out there, the reshuffling of what's happening right now, whether you're going to be taking, talent back, whether you're going to be looking to hire new ones. What positions do you have currently that are serving you, that are not serving you? How can you create more innovative positions for the different types of team members that you have already in your roster? And again, taking a look at them holistically. And I know I had Santiro on my show last year talking about this. And I know you guys have a really good example with Vector, which I think we're going to get to. But I think we really need to change our thinking around what that looks like and how can we really, make it an environment that everybody wants to be in, and they're able to do not only their job, but they're able to do what they like to do personally and professionally. And Santiro gave me a great example of that when I spoke to them last year, and that was, I think, one of their team members was a chef or really, really liked to cook. And so not only did they, work with them in his current position and what he was doing, and he really enjoyed what he was doing at Santiro, but he made them a big part of what they were doing as a culture in their outside activities, right? So if they were doing a barbecue for the company, or they were doing a barbecue for the customers, they were including him on that. And that really brings the team members together.
That's a really great approach. I think we've all worked with companies that have an exceptional hiring, evaluation, onboarding, and career path methodology, and they're always the most successful companies. You have to be very intentional. Look, when you think about a company as an investor, you don't invest necessarily in the company, you invest in the team. Every investor will tell you the first thing they evaluate when they evaluate an investment is the team. Mm-hmm. And, the companies that are intentional about that are usually the most successful. So that's great to hear that Santiro is doing that. We work with and share space with Enrique Alvarez at Vector Global Logistics, very similar company. What I have coined a give forward company. Some companies give back, some give forward. They give first. Their purpose is to be able to give to the less fortunate in the world, and they do so by running a profitable business that enables them to do that. But that also flows over into their how they manage their people and how they select their people and how they purpose their people. Enrique talks about a results-oriented culture, and that can seem really cliche, but in their case, you decide whether you work in the office or whether you work at home, or when you do either of those things. And as long as you are progressing, of course, you're free to do it however you want. And they have chosen the right people with the right capability to be able to do that. And and they've ingrained this purpose first culture. You talked about purpose, right? They've ingrained this purpose first culture in every single person in the organization, and it is sort of a litmus test for the kind of people that can do exactly what he's challenging them to do, because there's a lot of obligation that goes along with that. A results-oriented culture means you don't get the results, you don't remain in the culture. So there's obligation as well as freedom in that, and they've got a great staff of people that understand and thrive in that kind of environment. So anyway, there are lots of other approaches that companies are taking. Vector is one of my personal favorites. I can tell you this: I sit in quite a few board meetings, and I'm on advisory boards and things like that. And I've heard some encouraging and some concerning things in these board meetings. Actually, the first board meeting I was in right after this all went down was really encouraging. That company, all shall remain nameless, but that company is really approaching this from an attrition standpoint. They had a couple people who were, who were wanting to work less, and one person who wanted to retire, and things like that. And they have figured that into their plan and accelerated that to do good for those people and also for the business, so that they haven't even planned so much as salary cuts, much less cutting any personnel. On the other hand, I have one company who had to cut almost 20% of their staff. And the discussions we've been having with that company is this an opportunity to upskill? And I think you were alluding to that earlier, Sarah, is if we're sort of shuffling staff with furloughs and layoffs, do we hire fewer back? Do we take this opportunity to upskill to get, because now there are just in the States, 22 million, I believe, people unemployed. Do we take this opportunity to try and get the best of the best from what is now a much, much more rich talent pool than where we were just a month and a half ago or two ago, right?
Yeah, and I think those are really great questions, and obviously things that, organizations and companies are definitely taking a look at right now. And depending on the strategy and how they move forward, I mean, we've got a lot of time well, maybe not a lot of time, but we've got this opportunity here to really figure out what that looks like and nurture a culture that we want in the future. Before, it was kind of status quo for a lot of companies because we didn't have the time to shift gears. We didn't have time to take a look at it. Did we really need to take a look at it? But now we can take a look at not only the hiring process, but also the retention process that is going to be more fruitful for us in the future.
Yes, sorry. Again, taking notes because you alluded to automation, but I want to have Scott kind of sound off here first, and then let's come back to that as well. So Scott, what are you seeing out there? I mean, look, Scott, you're the talent guy, right? You come out of this industry, and I'm really interested in what your most knowledgeable perspective is of the three of us.
Yeah, well, so this is kind of going back to the bigger picture here. The logistics staffing industry is what brought me to Atlanta 15 years or so ago. And, the last 4 years, by and large, has been spent on more of the professional side of the talent space, especially in supply chain, manufacturing, engineering. So it's been a really interesting journey. But, I think more and more, what's almost inarguable is our professional lives, is the intermingling and the intertwining of our professional and our personal lives in this digital world, which is a really neat thing in many regards, because the savviest of companies and the most successful of companies are figuring out ways to support their team members, not just from a professional standpoint, but also, more importantly, arguably, from a personal standpoint. And so a couple things to consider. So executive chairman of Starbucks, everybody knows, Howard Schultz, once was quoted as saying, quote, "Hiring people is an art, not a science." That's going to make a lot of people mad, but I believe that still. Hiring people is an art, not a science, and resumes cannot tell you whether someone will fit into a company's culture.
Exactly. Can you read that one again, please?
Hey,
we're going to get into this, but that is the biggest problem with the hiring process.
I'm with you. So when I think of assessing personal skills, a big part of that, to me at least, is assessing values and motivations, short and long-term goals. And really, hiring managers have to determine one big thing. Above all else, is the candidate a cultural fit? But let me speak out of both sides of my mouth for a moment, because it is really important. With all that said, I've seen some very intelligent HR leaders share important thoughts around how critical it is to approach the culture fit test appropriately. Because if you don't, it can lead to bias and lack of diversity. And of course, you're going to stifle growth and bottom line success by having a team that all come from the same walk of life, right? If we all look alike, you're gonna not do you're not capitalizing on the art of the possible, no doubt. So, when I think about that cultural fit test, we've got to take a measured approach that really is all about mapping that out and specifying very objectively the skill sets and characteristics which are and are not cultural fits, and then allowing that to play the right extent in the hiring process, right? Because Sarah, as we were coming on here today for this podcast, you used the word holistic. Well, I personally believe that one of the most important aspects of successful talent management is taking a holistic approach, and that means, to me, not let one, unless it's an integrity issue or some of the non-negotiables, keeping context and perspective. But anyway, those are some initial thoughts when I hear about how important it is and how more and more companies are assessing both the personal and professional side of the coin.
Awesome.
Right.
I think those are really, really great examples. And I'm a huge proponent of holistic strategies, taking a look at a person and even the company from a really entire viewpoint of who they are as a person and how they want to grow and who they want to be.
Great point. Absolutely. And because, and that's where the art of it comes in, right? I'll be the first to tell you, and I'm not sure if we're all kindred spirits around this. We've certainly had folks from the talent analytics side of the world, come on and share some really neat, innovative ways of helping organizations optimize how they assess, the professional side and those skill sets. And I believe there's a place for that, especially in 2020. It's not 1980. However, Sarah, back to your point, and back to what we were saying, just 5-10 minutes ago, that is not the analytics doesn't have to be, nor arguably should it be, the prime rib of the meal. It should be one of the things that's weighted appropriately for that role and for that organization and industry and for the type of candidate that the team is looking to bring on. And so framing it up accurately and holistically, and that's a big part of being successful when it comes to talent strategies and talent acquisition strategies, I believe, in 2020 and beyond.
Well, you have to consider everything. That's what holistic means, right? So I think data has its place. I think a sound and thorough process has its place, and assessing culture fit has its place. We're going to talk in just a few minutes about how companies need to, or how companies are trapped in old-fashioned ways of doing it. But I can tell you that in every company that I've ever run, I was the last person that every single, and I mean every single person we hired talked to, because my job was, I'm terrible, frankly, at evaluating talent. If I was to interview anyone, I would give them the job because I just genuinely like people, and I always see that thing in somebody that I feel like we can utilize. But my job at the companies, because I led them, was to assess the culture fit. If they got to me, I knew that they were the person that we wanted to select from a skills standpoint, from a goodness of fit, based on the data, based on the interviews, based on the goals and roles and all of those things in whatever their department was going to be. But I was the last line of defense for the culture. And my job was to communicate that and assess their fit at that point. And that kind of structure, look, hiring is the most important thing that you do.
Yeah. All right. So
a really sound process around that.
Yep. So you just foreshadowed where we're going next, which is inevitably there are so many organizations out there that are acting. We picked on 1980 a few minutes ago. We'll pick on maybe 1987 or 1988, because there's companies that still operate their talent management strategies and approaches as if we're not in 2020, and certainly not as if we're in 2030. So let's dive into that a little bit. And I guess let me lead off with a couple of things I've observed. And Sarah and Greg, I definitely want to get you all to chime in as well. So I got to tell you, this is going to sound crazy, but for starters, a lot of old-fashioned companies are putting way too much emphasis on one piece of the equation, which is the resume. And if you start, I'm not sure what the latest and greatest number is, but recruiters and hiring managers spend 12 seconds on every resume. They're going to certainly miss. We're human. We're going to miss things, but that's got to be just one piece. It's important to have a good resume and a solid resume to put your best foot forward, but it's a mistake where organizations start and stop based on that resume.
Hallelujah.
Hey, that fits right into our hymns, and I'm gonna circle back on that too.
Yeah,
all right.
Matt has done some research on that point, by the way.
Yes, that's right. We're going to get to that. But Sarah, you're right, and there's a lot of kindred spirits here. I think relying on the same channels that organizations did, back in 1995 or 2005, or frankly, even 2015, or relying on just one or two channels instead of, exploring and having dozens of different, if not hundreds of different ways that you can find candidates and have them find you. And I'm sure both y'all are going to also have a hallelujah moment here, but making the candidate wait and blaming it on the process, zero communication, and updates to candidates, especially if it's a candidate that you really want on the team. It's unacceptable to have them go weeks without being, informed of where things stand. That's bad process, as Greg spoke to earlier.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And then one final thing here, and then Greg, I think we're gonna get you to weigh in, and Sarah. But so a couple of years ago, I saw a specific case around negotiation, and I think this is more arguable, but I believe that old-fashioned approaches and organizations view negotiation in negative terms. There was a company a couple of years ago that rescinded an offer to a candidate. This candidate was fairly new to the industry. I think he'd only been in the industry for a couple of years. So really this is the first offer he had gotten other than, the offer he got out of college. So after he got the initial offer from this company, which shall also remain nameless, the candidate found out that he was going to have to buy out his apartment lease to be able to take the job in a different market, right? And this wasn't an hour or two down the road. This was, several states away. So he brought that back and informed the company that there was a new, roughly $1,000 expense in order to take the job. Well, I couldn't believe it. The company rescinded the offer.
Ooh.
And the candidate was taking an open communication, just transparent. It was offered to be verified, the whole shebang, and the company who wanted this candidate on their team, just 15 minutes prior, they rescinded the offer and refused to reconsider or revisit any conversations. That to me is not only short-sighted talent acquisition behavior, but it is a old-fashioned mindset where the employer or the hiring organization has all the power, and that is not the case.
Well, it sounds to me like they didn't do their due diligence in enough time.
Thank goodness for that candidate that he or she did not take that job.
That's right.
Yeah.
That would have to be one of the worst companies on the planet to work for that would do that. I mean, seriously.
Well,
right?
So on that note, I agree with you. That is old-fashioned behavior. So Greg, you weigh in, and then Sarah, I know you're chomping at the bit. What else when you think of old-fashioned practices? What else sticks out, Greg?
My take is very short on this, which you'll both be amazed to know, and very tactical. Job descriptions that are too technical, that don't sell the why and the core values of the company, and don't speak to the purpose of the role. That is so important to candidates today. And when companies have a job description that doesn't say, here's what we're about, here's what working here is like, here's what this experience is and why you will love it here, what we're doing as a higher purpose. Oh, and by the way, here's the role that you'll play. I may have been a little ahead of my time on this because my accounting and HR leader was like, oh my gosh, that's an advertisement. And I said, yeah, isn't that what we're doing? But the truth is, I wanted people to know what Blue Ridge was about. When you come to work at Blue Ridge, this is what it's like. This is what we're about, right? This is the spirit of the entity. You pre-screen people who are who understand or decide that they don't like your particular culture or approach. And when you have these really technical job descriptions, I can't even get through them anymore. Right? What's the point of knowing the job if you don't know what the company's going to be like? Anyway, that's
Great point. Great point. Sarah, okay, bring the thunder. I know you're chomping at the bit. Tell us.
Well, first of all, I think we might have shown the audience some hidden talents of mine when I sang hallelujah. But anyways,
I've never done is lip sync before, so now on your next lip sync battle, it needs to be live singing.
Yeah, so maybe Supply Chain Now trivia should turn into karaoke night. I don't know. I'm just saying. Anyways, back to Greg's point about storytelling. We need to storytell to attract talent. We need to put ads out there to be able to tell them who we are and what we do and who we're looking for, so that even before they go to apply, they know that it's a company that they want to work for. And I spoke about this on an episode of the Leaders in Supply Chain podcast with Radu a couple of weeks ago. It was myself and Eric Johnson, and we talked about the importance of storytelling to attract talent, and not only to attract talent, but also to retain that talent as well. And so it's really important that companies really get behind this notion, especially now as we're doing this reshuffling. There's a lot of opportunity here, and not only for the organizations, there's opportunities for the team members within those organizations to watch how their companies are reacting in crisis. What are they bringing to the table? How have they positioned themselves? How are they speaking to you? How are they changing some of the processes that they have in place? I know of somebody who has said that if one of their team members go to the hospital, they're going to be laid off. Like, that is not okay.
Right. Agreed.
And so how is your company performing in a crisis? And what does that look like? And are they the right company for you? Because there's got to be a fit on both sides. And the company needs to be taking a look at it. They need to be taking responsibility and putting together that storytelling of how they can attract talent, what that's going to look like for them in the future. What's their hiring process? How can we change it? What are the gaps? How does it work right now? I mean, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but if you're just taking a resume and your HR team is doing that and then passing it along to the person in charge of actually hiring that person, I've heard there's a lot of lag there, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the important point here is that, companies need to do their due diligence when they get a resume. I think they need to spend more time, and I really do challenge the HR community, and maybe they're already working on this, and if they are, kudos to them, but I challenge them to find more productive ways to be able to pass along to their HR individuals of the hiring process, changing that process, changing the mentality, really digging deep and taking a look at what we're doing and how we can change that.
Great point. If I could just weigh in real quick, Mike Hall, a former manager of mine, a mentor of mine, that has been in the industrial staffing space, manufacturing, supply chain for many years. If you heard him say anything, you'd hear him say, hey, it's not about how you act and lead when times are good, right? It's more what the measure of a man or woman or a business leader is when times are really tough, what do those decisions and actions look like? And I got to tell you, you're seeing that in the marketplace right now. Without without naming any names or companies, you're seeing brands and companies and organizations do things they don't have to do to take care of their employees in the markets and other victims of this pandemic. And then you're seeing organizations and business leaders, so-called business leaders, going in the opposite direction and being way opportunistic in a negative way and doing things to cut corners and not offering safety nets and doing some other things that just are less than savvy or less than savory. So that's really important. That's one of the things I'm looking at day in and day out as we work our way through the pandemic environment.
Yeah, and not making your team members feel valued, right?
Yep.
I think that that's a key point here when you go through a crisis like this and you see how your company is working through that. And if they're not feeling valued, then they're not going to help you get through this crisis.
Right.
Well,
that's right. Yep.
And so it doesn't work on either side.
They'll remember the loyalty or the lack thereof.
Absolutely. So, I know we've given a couple of examples of bad approaches here, and I kind of alluded to this before because I think that there's a huge gap between HR and business leaders looking for talent. And so I want to talk about that, right? Because I think, you said gone are the days of resume. I mean, are they really gone? Not really, because we're still doing that. But we have to revisit that process. I mean, everything on that piece of paper, depending on what they put on that piece of paper, really, I don't think is an indicator of who they are and what they do. My opinion on that is LinkedIn and doing some due diligence, spending some more time on each person that is applying to the position, whether that is, I'm not an HR professional, so whether that is conducive to what they do on a daily basis, I have no idea, but we need to be able to vet better. And I think also, talent that is applying for these jobs also need to put themselves out there, and LinkedIn is a really great place. They should be able to take a look at your LinkedIn profile. They can see your resume on your LinkedIn profile, but they also should see your participation. And that's really going to tell a company and an HR professional who you are, what you're all about, how you interact with people. All of that really says a lot about a person, and I'm just not sure that we're going to get that from a piece of paper and a resume that's sent in. And then as on top of that, I've heard some horror stories where, the HR professional is vetting the candidates and they're coming up with a short list and they're passing it to the business leader, and it's nothing like what they're looking for to fill the position.
Right. Well, and we've touched on job description a couple times here, but raise your hand if you like writing job descriptions.
Oh,
no, no one does, right?
No.
But it's so, that basic function, and call it a job description or call it we're seeing some organizations kind of do a quick video of showing what they're looking for, right? Which could lead to a job description. Whatever it is, being able to effectively communicate accurately what type of talent you're hiring for is so critical in today's market, right?
Yeah, I wonder too if there's a gap between the business leader and HR, because the business leader is living it every day. And so they know exactly, and maybe it comes down to communication and articulation of what exactly that they need and what exactly it's going to be for. And maybe there's a job description for the HR professional to understand it a little bit better. And maybe there's a job description that goes out into the public.
Yep.
I don't know what that answer is.
Well, there's undoubtedly, to your point, we're both well aware of the gap that exists between those two parties you've just identified, right? The business leader that will either directly or indirectly supervise, or this person will report up through their organization, typically directly, indirectly. And then the hiring leader and that team or a recruiter or you name it, that is actively out there talking to candidates based on their understanding of what the need is. And Sarah, as you've alluded to, holy cow, the disconnect between those two parties, amongst others, but those two key parties can oftentimes be pretty big, right? And where I see it play out, or have seen it play out, is obviously the job description, the interview process. Think of all that feedback that goes back and forth. Well, if you're not aligned around the need, clearly your interpretation of the interviews, of phone calls or otherwise, video interviews, you name it, they're going to be skewed. And so what's the so what here? Well, since if you don't see a problem, then enjoy your communication gap between these two parties, which, and I would say inarguably will lead to bad hires or no hires, or longer hiring cycles, and certainly more turnover. And if you like dealing with all of that, hey, live on your island,
Well, and I think there's a point here too. I mean, I had a company on the show last year as well talking about workforce engagement software and apps and different things like that. I mean, I think we also need to take a harder look at the tech from a retention standpoint, especially in supply chain when we're looking at warehousing and distribution staff that may or may not be on email, looking to take over shifts, right, and being able to do that less manually as well. I think there's a lot here that we need to take a look at that's just going to make everything more efficient for everybody. I mean, what do we want to pay people to do?
That's a great point. Greg, what are you hearing between some of the things that Sarah and I are talking about as it relates to some of the gaps that exist? What's your take?
I sense that these problems are very, very different based on the type or size of, particularly the size of company that you have. I'm going to use my favorite term and remind everybody that I've been exclusively in small to medium businesses for over 2 decades, and not one day more. So I've had, I have had great and collaborative relationships with my HR folks and felt completely in sync. But I guess at the same time, when I say that, they really let the line managers take the fore on hiring and provided support and collaboration and screening. But I think the problem is very different if you're Georgia Pacific or your GM or whatever, right? Versus if you're Blue Ridge or Vector or Centiro, sorry. You just have to be very, very conscious of that. I'm a little bit concerned about people leaning too much on automation and AI. At the same time, if you train the AI the right way, then it can accomplish in less than 12 seconds what a human being never could in a minute. So, there are some possibilities to use data and use automation the right way.
Right. And
probably be more rather than less inclusive of those resumes.
Good point. There's absolutely, I think the three of us would agree, there's not only a place today, a very valuable place for technology and AI to play a role in the talent and talent acquisition side, but that will probably grow more and more. But I think it's really important as the role of technology plays, that we still maintain a healthy and diverse way that we look at how we evaluate talent. And again, going back to holistically, right? I think that's such an important thing to keep between the ears here. All right, Sarah, before we start to wrap up here, I know we got some cool things that we want to finish up on. Anything that you want to double down on in terms of this gap that we have identified between these two general parties within organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I have a bit of a takeaway. I was in response to this episode, I was doing some research and an HBR article came up, building a game-changing talent strategy, that I thought really resonated. And there was a few things that they spoke about. You know, having a clear picture of your talent roadblocks in the tech space is the first step in transforming your human resources success. And I thought that that was really particularly important, whether you're in the tech space, whether you're in the supply chain space. Listen, there are roadblocks, and I think it's about time we be mindful of it, and it's about time that we, kick those down and figure out what that looks like so that everybody can win in the future. And then the last thing that they said was the best talent policies respond to changing conditions on the ground and to cultural differences across the globe. And I think that that's super important right now as we're going through the pandemic and what we're looking to do, and not only from a company's perspective, but also from the talent perspective as well.
Yep, great point. Great point. All right, so I've got a little, I want to wrap up before I got a couple of questions for the two of you, so get ready for the lightning round. Greg, real quick, the hymn, Malcolm got back to me as you mentioned, and it is, "My hope is built on nothing less." And there's a refrain that was ingrained in my brain back when I was a kid growing up in Aiken, South Carolina. "All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand." And when you were talking about foundation on the front end, I could see Ray Barber, my music minister, my beloved music minister growing up, leading our congregation singing that song. So good stuff there. And one heck of research by Malcolm. Holy cow.
Well, also that the parable of the house built on stone versus sand is Matthew 7 through 24. So, regardless of your spiritual experience or however you feel led, those parables from all of the religious books, but that one in particular has always stuck with me. So, consider it whatever you want. Consider it a historical or a teaching journal.
Right.
Man, those are such valuable lessons.
Sarah, did you think you were going to church today on Supply Chain Now?
Well, I did pipe in with that hallelujah.
There you go. That's right. You started it all.
Well, look, we all have our different ways that we seek comfort and serenity and faith and you name it. And, different strokes for different folks, but yeah. I really appreciate everybody's approach on this conversation here, and it's needed more than ever as we get through these uncertain times. So we're going to finish up with the lightning round here. I'm gonna two questions for both of you that I'm gonna get you to weigh in on very succinctly. Reader's Digest version. Yes, that Reader's Digest still exists. Good, accurate information is in demand right now, in high demand right now. So Sarah, starting with you, what are your go-to sources? Give me one or two sources that you look at, if not daily, weekly, and there's always great insights there.
Well, obviously I listen to you guys, but I also have a guide that is coming out. I don't know what this episode is coming out, but we already have it out. Lisa Fenton put a new ebook together for us, and she's all about negotiation, and it's called Your Return to Work Negotiation Master's Guide, and they can find that over at letstalksupplychain.com under our ebooks negotiations, and so I would highly recommend that one.
Love that. And negotiation is, that was something folks were trying to find out more about in the months prior, certainly years prior to the pandemic, and the art of negotiation will be really relevant in the months to come.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's, Greg, your take. What's your, give us your secret sauce, your go-to resource for information.
My go-to source is either direct to Reuters if I want news information, and then Google News, because I tend to triangulate every single story, knowing that I find Reuters to be the least biased among the news groups. What I've realized is that by the way, magazines or newspapers, they buy stories from Reuters and then they retitle them. by the way. And so that as a good source is great. And then I'll triangulate it with 2 or 3 other entities. Man, in supply chain, I got to tell you, Supply Chain Dive, those Industry Dive publications are great quality. Those are knowledgeable writers.
You stole one of mine. Yeah, Emma Cosgrove over there in particular.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
But
Yep.
Supply Chain Dive is a great resource. Supply Chain Digest, which has recently updated its look and feel, is a good one. Fast Company is a little different, but really represents a forward-looking view, and I found some great insights there. And then really the go-to that I look at every day is the Wall Street Journal Logistics Report. And, you know, we all have our favorites, but Jennifer Smith, not only for supply chain, but business in general, if you want to follow someone that always gives you an insightful take and no nonsense and the important stuff that should be on your radar, Jennifer Smith does a wonderful job. We just used one of her articles this morning for the Buzz, and you can check her out on Twitter too, at Jen Smith WSJ, to make it easy. Okay, second question. This is in the not so lightning round. What's one story?
Rolling Thunder round.
That's right, Rolling Thunder round. What is one story, Sarah, that our listeners really need to be paying attention to right now in supply chain?
Yeah, I think that we, you know, based on talent, I think we need to do our due diligence on reshuffling of talent and what that looks like from a holistic perspective. Take a look at your talent strategy and change it now.
Love that. We could just about wrap on that. Greg, what's one thing folks need to be watching for?
I think as consumers, we all need to be concerned about what Amazon is doing, particularly as regards their sellers. You know, the Wall Street Journal, your favorite, the Wall Street Journal just reported that they are in fact doing what I think all of us suspected them of doing, which is copying the items and private labeling the best items on their platform and undercutting prices of brands. And we've seen a flow of brands, the big brands, Nike and several others, away from Amazon. But I think we're going to continue to see that. And I think we've got to decide. We've got to vote with our wallets and decide whether, as consumers, we want to continue to condone and encourage and enable that activity.
And as it needs to be, it's perhaps paramount there, and not to move into a second episode, is the integrity issue, right? Because there's been one message being communicated to Congress and other bodies, and then we see the investigative reporting come out with the Wall Street Journal. So there's a lot more to that story, but I could have swore about 1.5 years ago, Greg White told me how this was going to play out. So your crystal ball, once again, always accurate. So, but definitely a story to be tracking.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, and each of us are tackling this from different angles, which is good. As someone that, as we were talking this morning, Greg, we try to separate the noise from true signals. And I think one of the dangerous things right now is all the wide variety of smart people that disagree on where we are, at least in this country, with COVID-19. And that, you know, we're not going to settle that here, but to see the meat packing, the meat plants struggle and more operations go down, and some of the analysts weigh in with some of the words they're choosing to use, which gets more and more stark. I think consumers need to be tracking that, and consumers need to really kick the tires on, are we over the hump yet, especially based on where they live. You know, because every part of the country certainly has different elements, in every part of the world has different elements in their fight against this, the coronavirus. So it's really important to do your homework and be mindful of what challenges still exist when it comes to you know, the stores and the supply chain and all the people that it takes to keep things on the shelves and allow you to buy things, essentials and other things out in your local community. So really watch that meat packing plant, you know, between the meat, beef, pork, chicken, some of those plants are cycling up and down, and I'm really curious to see, is this a little blip on the radar, or are we going to have some challenges 2 or 3 weeks ahead in terms of, selection at the grocery store? Hopefully that makes sense, Sarah and Greg.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I totally get it.
Yeah, I just saw it on the news that said that the food supply chain is breaking down as per Tyson Foods. I'm not sure if, it really needs to go that far, because
Right.
that really is going to really not help anybody not in supply chain not panic. And I think that there's ways around it and things that we could be doing. And I just hope that the right people in the right places are having those discussions.
Good point.
Excellent point, Sarah, because I think, look, when we're only talking about politics, it's one thing to be to have inflammatory and hyperbolic language, but when we're talking about people who are concerned about their actual livelihood, it's a stark realization for me that people are being hyperbolic, and particularly news sources are being hyperbolic, and we talked about that this morning.
That's right.
In the end, I think at the highest level, one must always recognize that as much as other people and organizations and your government and whoever cares about you, no one understands your situation and understands what's in your best interest except you, and you must always keep that in mind.
Yeah,
if you're not comfortable going out, don't go out, right? If you are comfortable, good on you, and hope be with you. So
and do your homework. Don't I think that the lesson here is not be a warn. Don't just stick to one source for getting your news and spin on things. I think look at lots of folks' opinion, especially lots of credible folks' opinion. Sarah, I think that undoubtedly there are some members of the media globally that are choosing certain words so that some folks will tune in or click here or click there, and there's some irresponsibility going on there. But anyway, we will see. We'll keep our finger on the pulse in the weeks ahead. And Sarah, a pleasure to have you back on for episode 3 of 4. So how can Sarah Barnes-Humphrey, Let's Talk Supply Chain and Ships, how can our listeners get in touch with you?
Well, I love LinkedIn, so follow us on Let's Talk Supply Chain LinkedIn page. Connect with me, Sarah Barnes-Humphrey, on LinkedIn. We've also got a ships page on LinkedIn as well. We're all over Twitter. I'm B Victorious on Twitter and Instagram. Check out our website, letstalksupplychain.com or ships.com. That's ships with a Z or a Z. Just to make that clear.
For us Americans, yes, thank you.
That's right.
And I would love to connect with everybody and see everybody on social.
Outstanding. Sarah Barnes-Humphrey, founder of Let's Talk Supply Chain and Ships with a Z, the pride of Toronto, Canada. Sarah, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Looking forward to having you back.
Thanks for having me on. I can't wait for number 4. I mean, guys, if you thought number 3 was good, just wait until we get to Super Trend number 4.
Right.
Greg, great conversation. Always a pleasure. I want to put you on the spot one last time before we sign off here. One clear-cut key takeaway, 20 seconds or less.
The tables have turned in hiring and human capital, and the game has changed. Whether we recognize what it's changed to or not, it has definitely changed. So everyone, candidates and companies alike, need to be flexible and open as we come back into a hiring phase, and be ready for anything.
Be ready for anything. Absolutely. On that note, lastly, of course, be sure to check out a wide variety of industry thought leadership at supplychainnowradio.com. Hopefully you've enjoyed this conversation as much as we have. You can find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. On behalf of the entire team, certainly this group here and the whole extended team, Scott Luton wishing you a successful week ahead. Please stay safe. Brighter days undoubtedly lie ahead, and we'll see you next time here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.